Your soulmate hired a private investigator to uncover your secrets. They collapsed the moment the investigator revealed you are. Something slipped through the cracks of a carefully planned investigation, and the person who thought they were about to expose your deepest secrets suddenly found themselves staring at a truth they never imagined could exist. The private investigator closed the folder, looked across the table without saying a word, and let the silence stretch just a little too long. Your soulmate leaned forward, expecting a list of hidden mistakes, unanswered questions, or a past they had never been told about. Instead, the investigator quietly pushed the file across the table and whispered, "You weren't searching for the wrong person, you were searching for the wrong story." Everything in the room became still. A cup of coffee sat untouched. The clock continued ticking, but it felt impossibly loud. Your soulmate reached for the pages with trembling curiosity, completely unaware that the next few seconds would change the way they saw you forever. And the first page wasn't even the biggest surprise. Every clue had pointed toward mystery. Every unanswered text, every unexpected coincidence, every strange feeling that seemed impossible to explain had convinced your soulmate that there had to be something hidden beneath the surface. Not because they wanted to doubt you, but because your presence never felt ordinary. You always seemed to appear exactly when life shifted direction. Conversations with you lingered in their thoughts for days. Small moments somehow became unforgettable memories. They couldn't explain why every attempt to move on somehow circled back to you again. So they hired someone whose job was to uncover facts instead of feelings. The investigator spent weeks connecting pieces nobody else could see. Old records. Professional achievements. Conversations with people who crossed your path years ago. Patterns that quietly repeated throughout your life. Then came the discovery that stopped the investigation cold. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a secret relationship. It wasn't anything dramatic at all. The investigator discovered something far more unsettling in the best possible way. Nearly every person interviewed described you using different words, yet they all arrived at the exact same conclusion. They said meeting you somehow changed the direction of their lives. Different cities. Different careers. Different ages. Different backgrounds. Yet every story ended with the same quiet sentence. After knowing them, everything became different. Stay with this, because one overlooked detail inside that report explains why your soulmate couldn't even finish reading the second page. Outside the office window, late afternoon sunlight reflected against nearby buildings while your soulmate remained frozen in their chair. The investigator wasn't selling fantasy. Every statement inside the file was supported by interviews, timelines, and ordinary facts that somehow created an extraordinary picture. You weren't hiding a dangerous secret. You weren't pretending to be someone else. The truth was almost impossible to believe because it was so beautifully simple. You had become the unexpected turning point in countless ordinary lives without ever trying to be. Sometimes through a conversation. Sometimes through encouragement. Sometimes simply by showing up when someone felt completely alone. Your soulmate slowly realized the investigation had uncovered something they never thought to search for. Your quiet impact on the people around you. Suddenly every moment between the two of you looked different. Every coincidence gained new meaning. Every unexplained connection felt less like chance and more like the beginning of something that had been unfolding long before either of you noticed. But hidden inside the final sealed envelope was one last discovery the investigator almost decided not to include, because it wasn't about your past. It was about your future. And the moment your soulmate finally opened that envelope, they understood why nothing between the two of you could ever be viewed the same way again. The envelope felt heavier than paper should ever feel. Your soulmate hesitated, almost afraid that opening it would erase the certainty they had finally begun to feel. The investigator quietly stood, walked toward the window, and gave them complete privacy. Inside the envelope wasn't another report, another interview, or another timeline. It was a handwritten note from the investigator himself. After years of doing this work, it began, I've learned that facts explain behavior, but they rarely explain connection. Your search led me somewhere unexpected. I was hired to uncover hidden secrets, but I found remarkable consistency instead. Everyone who truly knew this person described the same qualities without ever speaking to one another first. Integrity when no one was watching. Kindness that expected nothing in return. Calm during other people's storms. A rare ability to make others believe in themselves. Your soulmate read each sentence twice, then a third time, hoping they had misunderstood. They hadn't. The investigator wasn't saying you were perfect. He was saying something far more believable, that your greatest qualities had never been advertised. They had simply been witnessed over time. That realization landed harder than any shocking revelation ever could. Suddenly your soulmate remembered dozens of tiny moments they had dismissed as coincidence, the conversations where you somehow knew exactly what to say, the patience you showed when nobody thanked you, the quiet confidence you carried without demanding attention. Those memories now connected like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for years. Before they even realized it, tears had gathered in their eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that they had spent so much energy searching for hidden flaws that they almost overlooked the extraordinary truth standing in plain sight all along. And just when they believed the investigation was finally over, the investigator gently returned to the table and said, "There's one conversation I haven't told you about yet, because I needed you to read everything else first." That conversation had taken place with someone your soulmate never expected the investigator to meet. It wasn't a close friend or a family member. It was someone who had crossed paths with you only once several years earlier. The investigator admitted he almost ignored the lead because it seemed too insignificant. Yet that single meeting became one of the most unforgettable interviews in the entire case. The stranger described a difficult season in life when hope felt almost impossible to find. They recalled meeting you for only a short while, sharing an ordinary conversation that probably meant very little to you. But one sentence you spoke stayed with them every single day afterward. It encouraged them to take one more chance instead of giving up on a dream they had nearly abandoned. Years later that decision transformed their entire future. The investigator leaned forward and quietly admitted, that story wasn't unique. I kept hearing different versions of it. At that exact moment your soulmate realized something almost impossible to ignore. You never seemed aware of the impact you left behind. You never collected praise or reminded people what you had done for them. You simply moved forward, leaving quiet reminders of hope wherever life placed you. If this story has touched something inside your heart so far, I'd love to hear where you're watching from, and if you're enjoying this journey, consider sharing it with someone who believes meaningful connections still exist. The next discovery, however, wasn't about the people whose lives you had influenced. It was about one person whose life had been changing silently every single day without even realizing it. Your soulmate slowly looked up from the file and noticed their own reflection in the office window. For the first time, they weren't wondering who you really were. They were wondering who they had become since meeting you. The investigator smiled knowingly, almost as if he had been expecting that question from the beginning. He explained that throughout the investigation he had observed something unusual, not about you, but about the client sitting in front of him. Every update meeting had sounded different from the one before. The suspicion slowly turned into admiration. Curiosity transformed into gratitude. Doubt quietly disappeared, replaced by a growing sense of peace whenever your name entered the conversation. Without realizing it, your soulmate had been changing alongside the investigation itself. The search that began as an attempt to uncover hidden secrets had become a journey that uncovered hidden feelings instead. They finally understood why every attempt to create distance only made your presence feel stronger. It wasn't because mystery had trapped them. It was because truth had found them. As they carefully closed the folder, one final object slipped onto the table, a small photograph that hadn't been listed anywhere in the report. It captured an ordinary moment that seemed completely unimportant at first glance. Yet when your soulmate turned it over, they found a single handwritten sentence on the back that made their heartbeat stop for just a moment. It wasn't written by the investigator. It wasn't written by you. But somehow, it answered the one question neither of you had ever been brave enough to ask, and that answer would change everything waiting just beyond the next chapter. The handwriting on the back of the photograph was elegant, almost timeless, as though whoever had written it knew the words would one day arrive at exactly the right moment. It read, "Some people enter your life to impress you. Others enter your life to reveal who you were always meant to become." Your soulmate stared at the sentence, unable to look away. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't mysterious for the sake of mystery. Yet it explained something that every page in the investigation had been quietly pointing toward. The investigator broke the silence and admitted he had almost removed the photograph because it seemed too personal, but every time he tried, it felt like the story became incomplete. He explained that the picture had been given to him by someone who insisted it belonged in the final report. That person refused payment, refused recognition, and simply smiled before saying, "When they understand this picture, they'll stop searching for answers in the past and start paying attention to the future." Your soulmate slowly examined the image again. It showed you completely unaware that anyone was watching, laughing with genuine joy while helping someone else celebrate a small victory. There were no cameras focused on you. No audience applauding. No attempt to stand in the center of attention. The moment was ordinary, yet it carried a kind of quiet authenticity that couldn't be staged. Suddenly your soulmate understood why every investigation had failed to uncover hidden darkness. There wasn't a secret identity waiting to be exposed. The greatest secret was that you had never been trying to become extraordinary at all. You had simply chosen to remain genuine in a world that often rewarded appearances more than character. Stay close, because the next unexpected discovery wasn't hidden inside the file. It was waiting outside the office door. As your soulmate stepped into the hallway, they noticed something unusual. The receptionist smiled warmly and asked, "So, did you finally learn what everyone else eventually figures out?" The question felt strangely specific. Before your soulmate could respond, another employee quietly added, "You're not the first person to leave this office with a completely different perspective." Confused, they turned back toward the investigator, who couldn't help but laugh softly. He admitted that over the years he had accepted many difficult assignments, but this case had affected his entire team in ways he had never experienced before. Researchers who normally focused only on facts found themselves talking about kindness. Analysts who rarely discussed emotions kept asking the same question: how does one person create such lasting memories without even realizing it? Your soulmate realized the investigation had quietly changed everyone involved. No shocking scandal had captured their attention. No sensational headline had been uncovered. Instead, the search revealed something far rarer: a life filled with consistent actions that spoke louder than impressive words. That realization settled deep inside their heart. For the first time in a long while, they stopped wondering whether you were hiding something and started wondering whether they had been given an incredible opportunity they almost overlooked. There was one detail, however, that still didn't fit. One timeline inside the report remained highlighted in yellow, and beside it the investigator had written only 3 words: "Ask about Tuesday." Why would one ordinary day deserve such special attention? The answer was waiting only a few miles away, and it would connect every unanswered question into one unforgettable moment. Driving through familiar streets suddenly felt completely different. Every place your soulmate passed reminded them of a memory involving you, a conversation that once seemed ordinary, a shared laugh that now carried unexpected meaning, a simple goodbye that suddenly felt much more significant. When they finally reached the location marked in the report, they found no grand event, no dramatic surprise, and no carefully planned revelation. Instead, they discovered a quiet place where people still remembered your presence because of something incredibly simple you had done. One after another, strangers shared stories that sounded small on their own but became extraordinary together. Someone remembered your encouragement before an important interview. Someone else recalled your reassuring words during a stressful afternoon. Another person smiled as they described how one thoughtful conversation had restored confidence they thought they had lost forever. None of them knew each other, yet every story echoed the same quiet truth: your influence had never depended on attention, it had depended on authenticity. Standing there, your soulmate finally realized that the investigator hadn't uncovered your secrets at all. The investigation had uncovered your legacy long before either of you had imagined one existed. And just as that realization settled in, their phone vibrated with a new message from the investigator containing only one sentence: "There's one final person you still haven't spoken to, and their story explains why your paths were always destined to cross." That single message changed the direction of the journey once again, because the next conversation wouldn't reveal who you were. It would reveal who your soulmate was becoming. The address attached to the investigator's message led your soulmate to a quiet little bookstore tucked between 2 old brick buildings. Nothing about the place looked extraordinary. A small bell chimed as they stepped inside, and the comforting scent of old pages filled the air. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with a gentle smile, as though she had been expecting this visit all along. Before your soulmate could introduce themselves, she reached beneath the counter and carefully placed a small envelope on the wooden surface. "I wondered how long it would take," she said with a knowing smile. Confused, your soulmate asked if she knew you. She nodded softly. "Not the way you think. I only met this person a handful of times. But every visit left this place brighter than before." She explained that years earlier you had quietly encouraged a struggling local author whose confidence had nearly disappeared. That conversation inspired a book that eventually touched thousands of readers. You never asked for credit. In fact, the author had spent years trying to thank you but never managed to find the right moment. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter from that author. It didn't praise your achievements or describe impossible miracles. Instead, it simply said, "Some people rescue others without realizing they're doing it." Your soulmate folded the letter carefully, suddenly realizing that every stop along this journey had revealed the same invisible pattern. You weren't defined by one unforgettable moment. You were defined by hundreds of ordinary moments that quietly became unforgettable for everyone else. And somehow, the biggest chapter of that story hadn't even been written yet. The investigator had saved one final recording until now. Sitting quietly in the parked car outside the bookstore, your soulmate pressed play. The investigator's calm voice filled the silence. "If you're hearing this," he began, "then you've already discovered everything I was hired to investigate. But during this case, I uncovered one truth that wasn't part of my assignment." He paused before continuing. "I watched your questions change. At first you wanted evidence. Then you wanted understanding. Now you want courage. That's because the real mystery was never this person's past. It was whether you would recognize their value before fear convinced you to walk away." Those words settled deeply. Every doubt that once seemed so convincing now felt incredibly small compared to everything the investigation had uncovered. If this story has stayed with you until this moment, let me know in the comments what quality you value most in another person. And if you know someone who believes meaningful connections still exist, consider sharing this story with them. The investigator's recording wasn't finished. His final sentence carried a warmth your soulmate hadn't expected. "One last meeting has already been arranged. I didn't schedule it. Life did. Whether you choose to go is entirely up to you." Attached to the audio was a location, a time, and just one instruction: arrive without expectations. The sun was beginning to set when your soulmate reached the location. It wasn't a glamorous destination. It was a peaceful overlook where the city lights slowly awakened beneath an orange sky. A gentle breeze moved through the trees while distant laughter drifted from nearby walking paths. Everything felt strangely familiar, as though this place had been waiting for an unfinished conversation. Sitting on a nearby bench was someone quietly watching the horizon. Not looking for anyone, not checking a phone, simply enjoying the evening exactly as they always had. Your soulmate stopped walking. Every page of the investigation, every interview, every photograph, every unexpected discovery suddenly made perfect sense. None of it had been preparing them to uncover your secrets. It had been preparing them to finally see you without assumptions, without fear, and without the need to search for hidden answers. Just as they gathered the courage to take the next step, they noticed something resting on the empty side of the bench, a folded note with their name written across the front in familiar handwriting. It hadn't been mentioned in the report. The investigator never knew it existed. Yet somehow it felt like the final missing piece. As your soulmate slowly reached for it, one thought echoed louder than anything else: perhaps the greatest truth was never hidden inside an investigation. Perhaps it had been patiently waiting inside a single message that would change both of your futures forever. The note felt surprisingly warm, as though it hadn't been resting on the bench for very long. Your soulmate unfolded it carefully, expecting another mystery, Another.